And welcome everybody to Chalk Talk. It is Thursday, March the 5th. Happy Thursday to all of you. Welcome to Chalk Talk. As always, I am so excited to have you with us today at our new time. I hope that you got the information. We're trying a new time so that we can see if it works better for having a little more live interaction. A lot of you listen to the show when it's podcast later in the day, but I wanted to see what the response is once we are broadcasting at a little bit earlier time so that I can hear from some of you live. I appreciate your questions via text and Twitter. I do appreciate that. And I hope that you are also checking out our live streaming. So let me tell you this. If you have been a part of the live streaming the past couple of weeks and you have found that it was a little difficult for you to perhaps tune in to the live streaming because you could only hear me and you were not able to hear the guest, worked out. So if you are listening to the live streaming, you can send me a note. I will see it on the air and I will be able to let you know. You can let me know if the live streaming is working for you this time more so than in the past. Okay, so listen, a lot of fun stuff today. I'm very excited that my friend and colleague Craig Shelton is going to be joining me for today's show. Of course, Craig is the founder of Houston Media Watch, HMW. It is a blog that keeps up with what's happening around Houston sports in general, mostly radio, but definitely what's happening in Houston. And he also is the host of a show on UTN called The Cut. So Craig is a radio person who's very passionate about sports. We talk all the time, and we have lots in common when it comes to sports. And then we also see things differently because as it stands, typically I'm right and he is wrong. So that's just that's just something that we say. So I want to welcome in today to the show my friend, colleague, my brother from another mother, as we say, Craig Shelton. Hey, Craig, thank you for joining me today.
I'm more than happy to join you as always, Kim Davis, my sister, and you're correct. You are always right, just like my wife is always right. I'm never right when I talk to either one of you two guys.
Well, that's what makes it smart. Okay, so here's the thing. Here's what's on tap for today. We are going to talk. There is a lot happening in the world of sports. We're going to talk a lot of Texans and a lot of Rockets because that's what's really big, especially in this market, although we know a lot of people listen from other parts of the country. We'll hit the Astros a little bit. We're excited, Craig, that Marcus Coleman is going to join us today, a former Texan who keeps his pulse on the beat of what's happening around the National Football League and especially with the Houston Texans. But this has been, Craig, an interesting start to free agency and the offseason for the Houston Texans. If nothing else, just the initial, here's what I want to ask you, your initial thought about when you heard that Andre Johnson not only was more than likely not going to be a Texan. That wasn't terribly surprising, but the thought that perhaps the Texans have said to him, yeah, you know what, you're probably only going to be able to be kind of like a secondary kind of receiver on this team. When you heard that, what did you think?
I thought, dang. And really, a lot of arteries to my emotions with that, and I don't use the term emotions easily, just throwing it out there. I intend to say emotions because there are emotions attached when we talk about a guy like Andre Johnson, who has been the competitive heartbeat of the Texans until J.J. Watt arrived for the most part. I mean, Andre has been our most prized possession. He's been our national bragging rights. He's been the guy that makes everything okay and allows us to hold our heads up high as a Texan fan in any argument. Whether we were in the playoffs or not in the playoffs, we could always throw the Andre argument out there and feel like we were relevant in football conversations because we had this awesome, very professional number 80 on our roster, and those days are over. So as a fan, I believe I was like most folks, a bit of some sadness about seeing him go, obviously, but definitely I have a intellectual understanding and appreciation for the bang factor, which I equate to the new regime with Bill O'Brien making the tough decision and doing the things that must be done. Now, to whether or not they did it the right way, we'll find out more about that. Right now, we're hearing Andre's side of the story coming from him and his agent. I will say that Kennard McGuire, his agent, is one of the most ethically respected agents in football, so I don't have any reason to believe that Kennard is the type of agent that would put out bad information. That's just not his MO. But most people will say agent is an agent, like they will say a lawyer is a lawyer. But I know Kennard McGuire to be a very ethical guy, and kind of fitting that he's representing a guy like Andre. So we wish him the best. But the Texans are making tough decisions over there, Reliant. Chris Myers being cut, and now we just sit back and we just wait. If I'm Jonathan Joseph, I don't pick up the phone this morning if it ring Kim Day.
Let me tell you something. Yeah. Let me. I'm gonna be right back. You know what? You make an interesting point about we've only heard Andre's. What really Andre's camp side first. At this point, and like you, nothing but the highest amount of respect for Andre Johnson and just his team, because we've covered Andre, you've seen who he is, and the fans in this town, you know who Andre Johnson is, right? You know who he is. You've seen how he conducts business. He has been the consummate professional on and off the field. I'm not saying he's perfect, because then that would make him not human. So, but he is pretty close as you get to being the kind of guy I would think you'd want on your football team and in your organization, or just a part of your business. So I have no reason to think he heard anything other than what has come out from his camp. Now, here's what I do think, Craig. It'd be interesting from what you and I know of covering Bill O'Brien in the year since he has been here. I don't expect that he is going to really even address the Andre issue beyond saying something like this. We're moving forward. Andre is a great professional. We wish him nothing but the best. He's not going to say I don't think, I would be very surprised, let me say this, if Bill O'Brien ever addresses, okay, so do you guys really tell Andre he'd be a part-time receiver? I don't know that we'll ever hear the Texans' side of that, because that's just not what that organization does, right? I think they'll say, hey, we're moving forward, we're looking ahead. And, you and I have talked, I think I would have liked to have seen Andre here. If they had just said, we've got to reduce this salary, we've got to reduce the hit that we're going to take on the salary cap because of where we are and because we're trying to build this team, I think people could appreciate that a whole lot more than the idea that you're saying with the group that you have now, that he could not be a primary focus of the offense. That's almost kind of laughable.
Yeah, well, that's ridiculous. I mean, if that conversation did take place, that's a ridiculous conversation to have. And that's where the level of disrespect will come into play if you're Andre Johnson's camp. If the conversation, in fact, did go that way, and like you say, knowing Kennard to be what it is, I have no reason to believe that Kennard McGuire is a liar. Now, NFL teams typically spend things to benefit the image and profile of the organization, and what business doesn't do things to benefit themselves. So I'm not saying that the Texans are any greater center than any of the other 31 NFL teams if they did do so, but I would like to think that their team would have some type of a sentimental respect for Andre's tenure. I just think that maybe the Texans maybe moved a year too late for it to be done in a manner that maybe both sides felt things were, more tenable in a more quality way for both sides. I think when you get to the point that they got to at this point, that it probably wasn't any way for there to be some type of feelings.
Right.
Not, you know what I mean? I just don't think that was any perfect way to get it done. We'll say this, though, Kim. You talked about Bill O'Brien, and listen, we talked about this last year. If you remember, I said, look, let's folks, take a deep breath, and let's just wait. And let's just see who Bill O'Brien is. Because every year we get off season, we get draft, we get free agency periods, we get what happens during the draft, what happens during the season. And once teams make moves and we learn a little bit more about what their philosophy is, once they do it, they can't take it off the board. It becomes a part of their profile. And we know more about Bill O'Brien going into this year's draft than we knew last year. And apparently What we're learning about the guy is a lot of people may not appreciate it, but it's kind of funny to me because some of the same people that are complaining about the way the Texans are doing things now are some of the same folks that have for years up under the Kubiak regime, the Rick Smith regime, said that this team needs to take a more hardline position with the way that they manage the team. And I just find it a bit of irony that now that the team is kind of in Belichickian mode,
right?
But now the team is taking a huge peak or hit, at least in the eyes of some folks. So I just don't think that there's any way to always please the fans.
Okay, well, I'm going to agree with you on that. And here's the other thing. We had a caller. If you want to call us back, we will come to you soon. I'm talking with Craig Shelton. We're talking about the Houston Texans. We're talking the NFL. We're talking NFL free agency. We aren't even going to start talking about the draft yet because there's so much happening in terms of free agency and with veterans that really is where we are going to focus. But if you want to be a part of the conversation, you can call us now. The number is 773-897-6343. That number again is 773-897-6343. And also you can tweet us. You can reach me at Kim Y. Davis. If you want to tweet a question, because I often hear from you guys on Twitter, I appreciate that. Or you can reach Craig, tell them how they can reach you.
Yeah, you can reach me at 1. That's the number 1 and then Deep Media. 1 Deep Media. I'll be glad to hear from you. I'll follow back on Twitter.
All right, so we are talking sports. We're talking Texans in particular. You mentioned before I jumped in that if you were Jonathan Joseph, you probably would not answer the phone. Listen, there are so many question marks, and we're going to get a chance to talk about some of this with Marcus Coleman a little bit later in the show. But there's so many interesting question marks about this Texans team, Craig, in terms of what this team will look like, what this team will do moving forward. Clearly there's questions about receiver. There were questions about receiver before we knew that Andre was not going to be here. There's, kind of questions about quarterback, but not really, because I think, there are not a lot of options. So it's Ryan Mallett's job to lose. But what's going to happen defensively? What are they going to do with Kareem Jackson? Are they going to pay him? Will they lose him? Will they then try to retain Jonathan Joseph? You saw what happened with Kendrick Lewis. What are they going to do at outside linebacker? Here, let me say this, and then I'm going to get your opinion on this. So they clearly need a linebacker, right? And when we talk about salary cap and cap issues and the cap restraints that this Texans team has, and where can they reduce the cap and save some money. So there's a guy that is beloved here. I mean, we like him. We would hope to see him do well, but we know that he just has not recovered completely from those two season-ending injuries, the 2 prior seasons. I'm going with this, and that's Brian Cushing. Is that, Craig, a guy that you think that would you cut Cushing and try to save some of that cap hit, get him to try to restructure, or what do you do with the Brian Cushing?
Well, trying to get Brian Cushing to restructure is ideal circumstance, and I wouldn't be surprised if the Texans do that. There won't be a cut not this year. I doubt it. The cap hit is too dynamic.
Right.
If you cut Brian Cushing this season, so I don't think cutting him is an option. But if we look at the way things are trending over there now, I would imagine Brian Cushing has probably already had that phone call, talk and some discussion about restructuring. Yeah, definitely. I'd like to see this team be able to do something at linebacker. I don't know that you address inside linebacker in the first round of the draft. The only guy that would even remotely, I think that, well, I won't say the only guy, but Alvin Bud Dupree, the kid out of Kentucky, is one that I would like to see the Texans take a look at. I just don't know how they'll have him graded on that draft board. What we did learn, and I'm a real stickler on not being so much of a prognosticator as a person that tries to learn from the history and the profile that's laid out by the team's actions.
Right.
And what we learned last year with the Texans is that they ran a very disciplined draft board. They stuck to their draft board. And for listeners that may not have a full understanding of what that means is teams have tier ratings basically for players in regard to what their value is per where they can be reached at in a round in the draft. So you may have a player that if that you typically may not want to take, but if he's sitting there at a position where you just had no idea or no thought process of him being there, and he's the highest rated player on your board at that time, even though he may not be your most significant need, teams are taking that player a lot of times. And the Texans appear to be very disciplined at that last year, and I think that was the reason why we saw people like C.J. Fedora was drafted, where we saw him drafted, and the kid out of UCLA drafted on the offensive line, is because they just stayed true to their board.
And so I'm going to stop. I'm going to jump in for a second because we're going to go grab a call, and then I'll ask you this as I'm going to bring in the caller that's on the board. When you think of what you got from Fedorowicz, did that discipline, did them staying true to where they were on the board, did it work for them?
Yeah, fair question for him and Xavier Stewart. Fair question.
Right. All right. Well, this is Chalk Hawk, Craig Shelton, Kim Davis. We are calling you on with Kim and Craig. Do you have a question?
Yeah, I got a question. I just found out Brandon Marshall is possibly going to be shot this year from Chicago, and I was wondering what the possibilities of the Texans maybe picking him up, or would you think they would go to the draft to pick a receiver, since we know that Andre Johnson's not going to be here next year?
Yeah, that's a good question. In my opinion, with that, I think you're probably going to get a little bit mixed bag with that. I think you're probably going to see the Texans go to the draft, and there's some kids out there, and maybe even in the first round. Idealistically, I wouldn't think that the Texans want to make that pick in the first round of a receiver unless something remarkable happens, and you get somebody like Amari Cooper or the white kid out of West Virginia falling down to 16. I don't think the Texans are going to pass on either one of those guys. But when you start looking at kids like the kid out of like Jalen Strong out of Arizona State, a kid like that, I don't know if the Texans would pull a trigger on a kid like that in the first round at that position. They may even decide to trade down and make that move. But in regard to Brandon Marshall, I don't know that Brandon Marshall will be an option for the Texans. I know Brian Hartline is scheduled to meet with the Texans today. Glorified Kevin Walters, if you want to know who he is.
Right.
I think he was targeted 63 times last year with Miami, had about 39 catches and 414 yards on the season in reception. So you're not talking about a true replacement for Andre Johnson. I would like to see the Texans go after a veteran proven receiver like a Brandon Marshall if the price is right.
And I think that's the key, Craig. You mentioned it. I mean, if they're talking about cap issues, I think when you look at other veterans, it's going to depend a lot too on the number, because they stand to save about $8 million on the cap with Andre not being on the roster. And so, are you trying to? If you're going to use all that money for a receiver, then you may as well have kept Andre. So if you're going to try to use some of it on a receiver and something for somewhere else, because you don't know where you're going to be in terms of your defensive backfield, I think they have a lot of kind of chess playing to play over the next few weeks when it comes to how they use that money.
The Texans are almost forced to go to the draft and the free agency, because losing Andre, I mean, even let's just say if Andre was coming back to this team,
right?
You still had some depth issues on the receiving core. I'm one of those people that do believe that DeVille Posey has some future with the Texans and makes the develop. I don't know that Bill O'Brien feels the same way.
Well, he was only active one game last year, so either Bill O'Brien, really missed it and had some kind of a revelation in the offseason, or DeVille Posey's having an amazing offseason that we don't know about. I don't see him having a huge future just because of how Bill O'Brien, he didn't even activate the kid but one game last year.
Yeah, that's my point. I don't, like I said, I don't know that Bill O'Brien feels like I feel. Now, I'll tell you, there's one guy out there, and I want to hear me out what I'm saying. Don't misinterpret what I'm saying. I'm not saying bring this guy in to be a backup running back, because I don't believe that he is a backup running back, a true number one or number two. I believe he's a depth guy that's really a slot receiver and a special teams guy and can help you at running back in a pinch. And that's Reggie Bush.
Right.
Bush has wide receiver in. He's got wide receiver speed and agility. He's a good route runner, and he is a matchup nightmare in space. He's a space guy. He's never been used correctly since he came in the league. I believe New Orleans may have felt some pressure to use him more as a running back than what they really should have. He's Percy Harvin. He's very exposed.
Hey, Craig, hold that thought for a second. I'm going to see if our caller has any other questions before we let him go. Is there anything else, caller? Did we address your Brandon Marshall issue? Hello, caller? All right. Thank you so much for that call. I wanted to make sure that we didn't, if he had something else to add. I'm sorry?
You still there, Tony?
No, I think he hung up. So if you want to get back in, call us back. We want to make sure that we, give you a chance to, if you had another question, to get that in. The number again is 773-897-6343. And Craig, to get back to what you said, I know you and I have talked a lot about this off the air, about what Reggie Bush could do in terms of, helping out. You look at him more as like a slot kind of receiver, and also somebody who could probably help them on special teams.
Yeah, I mean, Reggie Bush is an excellent guy on special teams. He's always been a good punt returner. Can help you in the kick return game. Obviously, the Texans need help in the kick return game. Just as Texan Martin, and I just don't think that Reggie Bush has ever been used correctly. And the Texans are lacking explosive playmakers on offense. We didn't get a lot of explosive plays from the tight ends last year. We got all of our explosive plays from DeAndre Hopkins for the most part. Dre was kind of hit and miss, and I think that's due more to
quarterback
in the quarterback position,
right?
More than anything in that regard. And then the tight end play. You got young tight ends on this roster. And the one guy that does have a little experience in Graham is a one-trick pony. He can only help you in the passing game. He's not big enough or physical enough to block anyone. But Ryan Fitzpatrick doesn't see the field well in the middle of the field at 6'2". But you notice the minute that we got a quarterback in there with some size on that can see the field better, the tight end started catching passes across the middle. So I just think the tight end issue is about two things. It's about their young guys in Graham and Fedorowicz, and then Graham, a second-year guy, Fedorowicz was a rookie, and both guys were playing in a system that was very new to them. So I just think that maybe a little bit more patience and a different guy throwing the ball to help us at tight end. But whatever you do, your explosive plays are coming from Arian Foster and D-Hop. You've got to get another guy in there that can do some things for you. And Reggie Bush, nobody wants to be matched up with Reggie Bush.
Right.
Whether you safety, a linebacker, a cornerback. That's just not an ideal matchup for anyone to have to deal with. So if he's your slot guy, the next fourth or fifth receiver is going to be a better football player than Reggie Bush. See, I don't buy that. And I think if you can get him for the right money and you put him on your roster at the wide receiver position as a slot receiver, you save a roster spot, because then you can only carry two running backs, because he can actually be your third running back in a pinch. So
you are listening to Chalk Talk. I'm Kim Davis. That is Craig Shelton. We're going to put a pause right now in talking about the Texans for a bit, because in a moment we're going to be joined by Marcus Coleman, and we're going to get back to talking NFL and Texans. And I do want to give you guys a little bit of information, because I promised this to you about the Astros. It is spring training, and I know it feels like, why are we talking about baseball? There's so much happening with football and basketball. Yes, there is, but spring training officially is underway. And today the Astros will play their first game of the spring, actually 1 o'clock noon, Houston time, 1 o'clock Eastern in Kissimmee. They are playing Philadelphia. And so this is kind of another new regime for the Houston Astros, new manager, A.J. Hinch. He has announced the Astros starters for the first 5 games of the spring. Colin McHugh, right-hand pitcher, is going to start today, followed by left-hander Brett Oberholzer, and then left-hander Dallas Keuchel Scott Feldman and then Dan Straley will kind of round out the first 5 games of the spring. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about what's happening in spring training, but do think it's important to mention this Astros team has some real veterans, some real major leaguers, we'll say. And I think this could be the owner feels like, Craig, they should get to the playoffs, but I think we may see them, can they get to 500 or above? It's going to take, of course, at least that to get to the playoffs. Lance Berkman is in camp, and it's his first time serving as a guest instructor. And he joins Jeff Bagwell as a guest instructor this year, Jose Cruz, of course, Craig Biggio is back. Roger Clemens was there again. And so they're really trying to, embrace former Astros, use some of the history and the talent they've had in this organization to move some things forward and hopefully see this team get over the hump. And if it's the owner's way, get to the playoffs. So wanted to give you that nugget about what's happening in baseball before we jump back to talking about football, because we expect to hear from Marcus Coleman any moment. And then, of course, Craig, later in the show, we definitely have to talk about the NBA and the Houston Rockets and the past, if you will, even 4 or 5 days as it relates to what's going on with the Houston Rockets and the MVP race as a side note, but more importantly, just this Rockets franchise and what's going on within. You're listening to Chalk Talk. If you want to get in with Craig Shelton, I'm Kim Davis. You can call us at 773-897-6343, and you can tweet me at Kim Y. Davis. If you want to have a conversation or send me a question, I appreciate that. Or you can also reach Craig. You can reach him and tell him how to reach you, Craig.
Yeah, that's the number one deep media is how you can reach me. Kim, before we get too far away from those Astros, another baseball nugget, and I'm really excited about the Astros getting going. Get any type of, if they're relief pitching this year, and they get a few things to try to show up the relief pitching. But if we get what we got, or anything close to what we got last year from the starters, I mean, serviceable year by guys like Overholt. So if you can continue to see the growth from Keuchel and some of the other guys, and with the bats and things that they added to the team and the development of some of the younger players, a lot of reason to be optimistic about the Astros. I don't know about playoffs. I mean, let's go 500.
Let's go 500.
Yeah, but before we leave baseball, I just got to get your thoughts on something that we just don't want to just ignore completely. And I know it's not Astros related, but how about A-Rod back in uniform with the Yankees yesterday? A couple of hits, got on base, I think a couple times. I think he had a single, had a base on balls. Looked pretty good, sort of bat speed wasn't 100% up to what we probably used to seeing with him in his better days, but after being out for over a year, and I have to say, he acquitted himself pretty well. I'll be honest with you, I expected really nothing from him yesterday, and I was kind of surprised, and I have to admit, I was kind of indifferent going into it, didn't know what my feelings were about A-Rod, and I don't care about steroids. I could care less about that.
Right.
Just, but him suing Major League Baseball and the Players Union and suing it, well, I know they dropped the lawsuit, but to even go there with the Players Union, I thought was completely arrogant. And, at some point, man, you just admit what you did, move on.
Well, you know what?
I have to admit, I was real happy to see him out there yesterday. I felt pretty good.
Well, you know what? You are probably in a minority. I'm with you. I'm not bothered by it. I don't have any emotion really about the A-Rod thing. It's a tough task ahead of him. I mean, he used to be, obviously one of the premier players of the league, and he got his first hit in spring training, his first at bat. But man, things are far from being back to normal, and he just continues, Craig, to make moves and decisions that are just make it tough for the people around him to embrace him. They don't have much choice because of just the hefty salary that he is commanding and is guaranteed. But that situation is, you kind of think, okay, get him back on the field. Let's see how he does. And it just continues to be, one set of circumstances that are somewhat dramatic after another with this guy.
Well, he won't say a lot because there's still some things going out there, other cases that are being still under investigation related to the steroids issues that he had with other folks. So he's not going to say a lot. He's going to have to almost go Marshawn Lynch on you because there's some legalities that come into play. If these things get in the litigation and if he's involved in the litigation. So he's not going to do a lot of talking. But any problems that remain with fans or in the locker room on any level for A-Rod, the elixir is simply hit fastballs.
Hit fastballs. Right.
Just hit fastballs.
You know what? And that's, Craig, we have I think we may have Marcus holding for us now. And that becomes the answer, really. So it kind of cures everything, right? When hit fastballs, throw strikes, whatever it is you do it well. And then people can, suddenly become a lot more forgiving.
No doubt.
You're listening to Chalk Talk with Kim Davis and Craig Shelton today, who is guest hosting with me. I so appreciate him being a part of the show. We've been talking a lot of NFL, a lot of Texans. We talked a little bit about baseball, and we're going to go back, I think, to talk more NFL and, of course, Texans. And we're jumping on the phone. Caller, you're on. Is this Marcus?
Yes, it is.
Hi, Marcus. It's Kim Davis and Craig Shelton.
Hi, Kim. How are y'all doing today?
We're good. Thank you so much for joining us.
No, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
All right. So I know Craig has a lot he wants to ask you about, but I'm going to ask you first, Marcus, if you will, when you know this game so well, because of course you played it and you follow it and you cover it. When you first heard, not so much that Andre Johnson might not be a Texan, but that the report was that he would not be a primary focus of this offense. I don't think anybody would be surprised that they would try to, get rid of the salary and a salary cap hit, but to think that he would not be a primary focus or a key part of the offense. The business part of it aside, what was your initial reaction when you heard that?
Well, I wasn't surprised by the fact that he would possibly be asked to take a pay cut or could possibly be a salary cap casualty based on his $16 million cap number. However, as you noted, in the report it stated that he was going to have a reduced role, and I found it to be more or less a slap in the face of Andre Johnson. To tell you the truth, you're asking him to basically catch 40 balls or 45 balls, and even in a down year, he still caught 85 balls, which was still in the top 15. I guess out of all wide receivers in the league, there were only about 12 or 13 guys that either had the same amount of catches or catches higher than Andre Johnson. So to say that he has to take a reduced role, especially when you don't necessarily have a true number one wide receiver, and if DeAndre Hopkins steps up and showed the ability that he had and why he was drafted so high, it looks like he could possibly move into that role, but he's still not considered number one. Right now, he's still more or less 1B, to be honest with you. And you don't have a receiver at the tight end position that has the ability to go out and catch balls. You have Arian Foster in the backfield. However, his role is going to be managed, just because of his injury history. So you're asking him to carry the ball. He's going to catch balls out of the backfield. After that, you really don't have anyone left. You have a young man, Darius Youngton, I think is his name, that was supposed to be the slot guy. Keyshawn Martin, who's also there. No one else has stepped up to fill any of those other roles. So to say that he has to take a reduced role, the first thing that popped in my mind was, okay, well, who's going to take up the slack? Are you depending on bringing in a free agent, someone from free agency? There's talk that Brandon Marshall, of course, is being shopped around a little bit. I got the report this morning, and there are some free agent wide receivers out there. Randall Cobb, Brian Hartline is visiting in Texas today. Or are you going to go with the draft? There are some good wide receivers in the draft. Amari Cooper, of course, is going to be gone. But you could, Devontae Parker from Louisville, he'll be available. Guys like that that will be available a little bit later on. But my first question was, okay, well, who's going to make up the slack, and how much do you plan on spreading the ball around if you're asking Andre to take a reduced role?
You are listening to Talk Talk. That's Marcus Coleman and Craig Shelton, who I know has something he wants to add. We are talking about the Texans, and in particular, at this moment, we're talking about what's happening with Andre Johnson. If you want to send in a question for Marcus to address, or Craig or myself, you can tweet me, Kim Y. Davis. You can hit us up on Facebook. You can tweet Craig at One Deep Media, and let us hear from you. Craig?
Yeah, let's move to the other side of the ball, folks. And of course, Marcus played defensive back with the Jets, Texans, and Cowboys. And Marcus and I were former co-hosts together on KCRH Radio. We worked together in the past real close. And he's a Red Raider. Red Raider plays football up in Texas State where my little brother plays. So Marcus is my brother. But Marcus, you played the cornerback position. You were schooled by Aaron Glenn. So you know the position very, very well. Played cornerback, played safety. One of the things that jumped out under Bill O'Brien and Romeo Cornell's regime with me last year was the play of the secondary. In terms of depth, I thought that the depth last year really showed up for the Texans. And with the contract situation with Kareem Jackson, and then with the salary cap number that is going to be on Jonathan Joseph, most folks around town and around the country are thinking that it's going to be either or. The Texans are either going to re-sign Kareem Jackson, let go of Jonathan Joseph, at best have Jonathan Joseph maybe rework his contract and hopefully be able to retain him and Kareem Jackson. But most think it'll be either or. Marcus, I think that there's a scenario in play here because of the improved play of Bouye and what we saw from kids like Morris and the development of those younger kids, that we may not see Jonathan Joseph or Kareem Jackson in a Texans uniform this year. I think that's a possibility. Your thoughts on that?
I actually agree with you. You talk about Kareem Jackson, and he's of course, it is going to be looking for a big money deal, and where he's paid in, in the top 10 or top 15 of cornerbacks in the NFL. And personally, although he shows flashes of consistency and he has gotten better, from his rookie year, I don't think you pay him any more than $6 or $7 million a year. I mean, that's the type of corner that he is. He's not, more or less elite, corner where he's making an excess of that amount. And if he's looking for that, I don't, if the Texans are being as smart as I think, they could be, or trying to show that they're capable of being, I don't think they're paying that amount. So he could possibly be finding work elsewhere in the NFL. There are a lot of teams that have plenty of salary cap room. You talk about the Raiders and the Bucks and the Jets. They all have a lot, salary cap space and have the ability to pay Kareem that much. They wouldn't necessarily be getting that type of fare, but in the NFL, teams typically, have shown to overpay for players, in this league at every position. And for Jonathan Joseph, his concern is I don't think that he's not a high-level player anymore. It's just the injury factor, and his salary is, his salary isn't worth, what he's giving out on the field. And even though he, played in all of the games last year, and even the year before that, he played in the majority of them. But the production for what he's being paid, they don't equate. So you have to ask him to either take a pay cut or he becomes a salary cap casualty, himself. And as you brought up, with the emergence of Bouye, you look at Rowe, who played well, even though he moves around a little bit. Daryl Morris, they have some depth, at the position, and they're younger right now. They're cheaper. You're still going to get quality play out of them. You may not get star power play out of them, but you're still going to get consistency, and you're still going to get consistent play out of those young men, and you actually give them the opportunity to grow and become, whether it be stars or elite players themselves. So I think there is a possibility that both Kareem and Jonathan Joseph could be gone. And just to go back to Jonathan Joseph's contract, still need to address the safety position. I know Kendrick Lewis played better than this year under racks and what he's shown in Kansas City. However, you still need a higher level player at the free safety position. You also need somebody a strong safety that can do more than just be in the box guy. You need somebody that has the ability to cover as well as playing the run as well. And Swearinger is decent as a down linebacker in that area because he doesn't have to cover a lot of space and do a lot of things. But you need a guy because of the way offenses are, offenses are spread out now and the way that the game is being played now. You need a guy that's more or less an in-betweener. In college, you call it a rover back or, we call it a raider back, similar to what I played. You can line him up in the slot, line him up on the tight end, still is able to come up and be effective in run support, be a good tackler. That's the type of guy that you need at the strong safety position, particularly, and at the nickel position now. So they still have some areas that they need to address, beyond just cornerbacks. But I definitely could see a scenario where both Kareem Jackson and Jonathan Joseph aren't in a Texan uniform next year.
So before we, Marcus, I know we don't have a lot of time with you, and so you have such great insight. Before you have to run, I want to ask you something about some names that not necessarily impact the Texans directly because you're not talking about them being here, but they could impact them just because of where they're going. Of course, I would say probably the biggest free agent defensively this year is Ndamukong Suh. And so now there's talk about the Colts and the Dolphins both trying to make a run at him. So the Colts, of course, that would have impacted what happens with the Texans because they're in the division. And the other thing is, when we talked about Andre earlier, when I've heard of teams, and I'm sure you guys have seen some of the reports of where Andre could possibly end up, the Colts happen to be one of those teams. The Colts, of course, have a fair amount of space under their cap. How do moves like that, how much better do those moves make a team like the Colts?
Well, if you were to add Ndamukong Suh and Andre Johnson to the Colts, I think you would honestly have to put them definitely coming out of the AFC as favorites to go to the Super Bowl next year because they're really close defensively. They're pretty good at safety. They're not excellent, but they're better than average. They have good corners on the outside. They can play man to man. The linebackers are very good. Up front, they've always been small. Even going back to the Tony Dungy, era, they've always been smaller up front. But they're more or less a 3-4 team. They play a little bit of hybrid, but they're more or less a 3-4 team. If they were to get a run stopper and a guy that can create pocket pressure like Ndamukong Suh up front and add maybe another guy alongside of him, I think that puts their defense, in a higher level than they were before. And you add Andre Johnson to T.Y. Hilton, Fleener, if they were to re-sign Richard Wayne to a 1 or 2 year deal, at minimum money, I think that puts them in the driver's seat. Not only to win the division, but to get out of the AFC and possibly go to the Super Bowl. So moves like that, can take a team that's very close, like the Colts, and put them over the hump and put them into that next level, of teams that you have to consider as being Super Bowl contenders. Now, right now Houston's rebuilding, and although they're trying to clean up whatever cap nets that they had, to still try to bring in guys that Bill O'Brien likes and that Romeo Pereira likes, and try to add to the depth that they already have, it's still going to take a couple of more years, and if the Colts make moves like that, let's say that they did hypothetically, I mean, Houston's still going to be behind for another 2 or 3 years, and even though runs with teams, usually fill out after a while, they have to rebuild for different reasons. They still put Houston in a very vulnerable position. It puts them behind.
When you talk about teams that players that the Texans like, we hit on the Colts front seven defensively. They were able to get Suh in, and so let's match that. Let's do the same with the Texans defensively, and talk a little bit about this front seven before we let you go, because obviously features J.J. Watt, and we know the Texans need of improvement at inside linebacker and an outside linebacker with Brooks Reed's contract being up and his play just not being up to par. So it's going to be interesting to see what the Texans do at inside linebacker next to Cushing and how well Cushing plays. But with Rock's 3-4 scheme that he runs, which is more that double A gap scheme, and with the Patriots releasing Vince Wilfork, I'd like to get your thoughts on that guy. If the coach were to bring in Sue and the Texans were to counter that and get Wilfork inside, Wilfork is not Sue, but for what the Texans need to get done, he would sure be a help if you ask me.
No, I agree. I think he would be a help. It all comes down to at the end, can they afford him? Would be the issue. And honestly, in order for them to do that, if they were to bring in somebody like Vince Wilfork, or somebody that is going to command a certain amount of money that he would and that he's worth, they're still going to have to make some salary cap moves. Go back to the restructure of J.J. Joe's contract or cutting him. They need to redo Christian's contract as well. J.J. just resigned him, so he's good. You get a little bit of, money released if you let Brooks Reed go. But bringing in Vince Wilfork would definitely be an upgrade. And, I would honestly, if you had the space, bring in Vince Wilfork and try to keep Pickett as well. You get Pickett. You get Pickett at a lower salary. You keep both of those guys, and now you have two veteran guys that understand, how to play the 3-4 front. They can stop the run, create a little bit of pressure when you need them to, and they'll just two of those guys will take up 4 guys by themselves, which frees up everybody else.
Well, they could be great mentors for Knicks too. The Knicks needs to work alongside of some pros like that. I'd love to see Vince Wilfork get in here with the Texans for a year or two. That'd be awesome, man. Hey Marcus, man, we sure appreciate you taking time to talk a little football with us, man. I can't tell you how grateful you are.
Hey Marcus, we appreciate it. Thanks for the insight, and we look forward to talking to you again soon.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate it.
All right, that was Marcus.
All right.
That was Marcus Coleman. He is a former NFL player. He has also experience talking about football, not just playing it. So we appreciate his input. You are listening to Chalk Talk, and we are in the really the bottom half of our show, about the last quarter hour, and we want to make sure, Craig, that we talk a little bit about the NBA and the Houston Rockets. We can, of course, talk about football all day because it's that time of year. You can actually talk about football year round, but right now, next week things really heat up. There's a lot happening. There's talk about, the Troy up in Pittsburgh having a situation with the Steelers. There's stuff all over the league. But we want to take a minute now and talk a little bit about the NBA and the Houston Rockets. So the Rockets, Craig, played just one of the best basketball games to watch, most entertaining games on Sunday, live on ABC. They took on the Cavaliers in the Toyota Center. It was LeBron and James Harden kind of head-to-head, two names you hear tossed around a lot in the whole MVP battle for MVP. Of course, neither player will ever say that they think about those things when they take the court. But when you're playing, that was just the perfect kind of a storm, if you will, for the two of them to meet on national TV. And it was a really, hard-fought game. The Rockets won that game in overtime. James Harden was then, of course, suspended for the following game because of a kick that I think was reactionary or inadvertent. I get it, though, on LeBron James. The Rockets then went and lost to Atlanta in a game where they had about a 15-point lead at one point without now, remember, James Harden and Dwight Howard, who has been out for at least 4 weeks. Then they came back last night and lost to Memphis in a tough loss at home in the Toyota Center. Your thoughts about this Rockets team? I almost forgot, Craig, what it looks like to see Dwight Howard play for the Rockets.
Yeah, you gotta give it up for these guys. I was like you, Kim. I was real proud, and I use that word proud. I use the word emotional in regard to Andre Johnson, but I was proud of the effort that the Rockets put on against LeBron James and the Cleveland Cavaliers. you always want to step up to the moment on a national game on a Sunday, but particularly when you're playing against the best player in the world. But what James Harden was able to do in that game against LeBron, I just couldn't say enough for James Harden's development as a player and as a team leader. His skill set has never been in question with me as far as what he can do physically on the court. But I have to admit, I did not see James Harden in the mental capacity that I respect him now as a basketball player. And I'm mostly impressed with his effort on defense after what we saw the last couple of years. I was just so proud of the way that the team stepped up. And it's not just what they did against Cleveland. It's the fact that Cleveland game, capped off a 5-game homestand and a winning streak. And, they beat a couple of good teams in that span over that time period. You beat the Clippers without Blake Griffin. Well, that's okay. We played without Dwight Howard, So I was really just grateful to see the team play as well as they did. And I know they didn't have Kyrie Irving out there, but hey, we missing our big guy. They missing their point guard. It was just an outstanding game. Now, let's see what happens going forward. Let's see what happens going forward. I'm not so concerned about James Harden and the MVP as I am about James Harden being play at the same level. That's what I want to see happen.
You make a great point. You're listening to Chalk Talk. I'm Kim Davis. He is Craig Shelton. We're talking a little bit of Rockets basketball. Things that really is interesting to me. Had played in 59 straight games prior to the suspension. He played in every game this season. Even when he rolled his ankle last week, he came back and played. And he's not just playing. In many instances, he's kind of carrying this team, right? He's having to because he's the guy. So I'll be curious to see, like you said, that they allow him to not be worn out, one, and then how Dwight Howard becomes integrated back into this team, right? It's at the 4-week point. They don't talk much about his injury. It's about time that I guess they will look at it again, if you will. But here's another thing. We have to talk about Terrence Jones and what he has been able to do and how he has really been stepping up. And you can tell that while he was out with his injury, he's gotten a little stronger. He looks more confident. And he has really been a force and a factor. And it's fun to watch him play.
Yeah, the third position for the Rockets is much improved between he and Giannis Montiunas. I was a huge Montiunas guy when the Rockets drafted him and set him overseas for a minute. But I just always thought that with that 7-foot frame and his ability to stretch the floor, initially we thought Montiunas was going to strictly be a stretch 4, but the way that he developed his game inside the paint offensively, and he's somewhat improved, on the defensive end. He's just not a natural rim defender. He's not that type of an athlete.
Right.
But he is crafty around it offensively, and his presence in the paint is going to be very, very, very important. Kim, I think the biggest thing for me with the Rockets this year is the fact that I think I'm most satisfied that Daryl Morey showed patience. And
right.
He's had a reputation for making a lot of moves with the roster. But what people had to understand was that, he was just moving pieces back when he had nothing but pieces. But now that he has core pieces, he's a lot more conservative for what he's willing to do. And I don't blame him. I blame him for not giving that extension, that fifth year that would have kept Goran Dragic here, but I don't fault him for not being willing to overpay for Goran Dragic to get him here this time, because Goran Dragic is not a max player, and he shouldn't be paid that way, not on a team like the Rockets. So that patience, holding on to that lottery pick that we got,
right,
and being willing to play the season out the way it is, roll with what you got. We made significant moves by getting the deal to get Josh Smith here. Corey Brewer is playing great for this ball club. The Rockets have as good a chance as anybody in the West, because the perennial powers in the West don't appear to be so powerful right about now. But I know San Antonio will turn the switch on when they get into the playoffs. But at some point, that well is going to run dry for San Antonio. And if it's going to run dry any year, you would think that this year might be the time, because not because of effort or preparation, but just all the time, always win.
It does win, and I think you make a good point. There's some people who would have probably thought that about that San Antonio team last year, but I tell you what, one of the things, Craig, that's going to be really key is the Rockets. One of the things for the Rockets will be who the Rockets match up with, and so where they end up. What spot do they end up? What does that Oklahoma City team look like with Durant back healthy? Where do they end up? Because, you think about who do you want to match up with in the first round? How well the Rockets do in the first round, obviously, it has to do with how they play, but a lot of it too has to do with who they are matched up against, because as we both know, the game changes in the playoffs. And so, but it's exciting to see, before we get out of here, the game last night where they lost at home to Memphis on, you look at kind of a late call. They made a run. They went on a 16-4 run in the fourth quarter. They were down to Memphis, got back in the game, and there was really a no call that everybody's really talking about today. And, when you sit back and you look at it, those are tough. You hate to see a game come down to that, but really it doesn't necessarily come down to that, because there's a lot of stuff that happens before that point. But here's something that's really interesting. So the Rockets, if you look at it, when you look at the Rockets, go to the free throw line a lot. That's what they do. The Rockets only got to the foul line 5 times last night. 5 times, right?
Yeah, that seems almost impossible.
That seems almost impossible.
The way he attacks the basket, 5 times to the free throw line in any NBA game. You know what? And to be playing against a team that plays a physical brand the way Memphis does, that doesn't even. It just doesn't make logical sense. It just doesn't make sense at all. It's almost impossible.
Well, hey, here's the good news. They were 100%. They were 5 of 5.
Yeah. Well, hey, I'm sure LeBron James could have used a couple of extra free throws Sunday. But you know what, Kim? Normally bad officiating, you don't want to harp on it too much, because
right.
It's to balance itself out over a year. But the problem with it is, the Western Conference is just so tight. And one game means so much.
Especially a game within your division. That was a whole game, not a half game, because they're in the same division.
Exactly. So it means a little bit more when you have a situation occur like that. You just hope that they get things like that figured out by the time we get into the playoffs. But that's why you have to execute. And you don't want to get yourself in situations late in games to where the referees become a part. Because the NBA is the worst officiated game in professional sports. I say it all the time, and I stand by that.
All right. We are out of time for today, Craig. We're going to have to wrap it up here. I appreciate you sitting in with me today. We appreciate Marcus Coleman and our other caller. And you know what? I know next week we'll talk more NFL, because there's so much of that to get to, and more NBA. But this was a great hour, a quick hour. And any final thing you want to say before we get out of here?
We had a fantastic time as usual, and tell folks to stay tuned, because Kim and I are working on some pretty good things I think people will enjoy as they begin to develop.
All right. Thanks a lot. He's Craig Shelton. I'm Kim Davis. That is it for today. I will see you next week at the same new time at 11 a.m. Central Standard Time. Remember to follow me on Twitter at Kim Y. Davis. Follow this Blog Talk show. Share the link with your friends. Follow me on Facebook. Do all that stuff. And let me hear from you. I'd love to know who you'd like to hear from, what interviews you'd like for me to bring to you. We will do our best to effort those for you. And remember, we are live streaming now, so you too can be a part of the conversation. Thanks for being here. Have a great, great week. If you are in wherever you are, stay warm, stay safe, stay dry. If you're in Texas, in Houston, you're chilly and cold. If you're in Dallas, you're even colder. And if you're on the East Coast, wow, you should move south. That's all I can tell you. That's it for now. Make it a great week. I will see you next Thursday at 11 a.m.
Thank you for using Blog Talk Radio.
Yeah. have my ringer off.
Please leave your message for 713-933-79.
Hello?
Hey.
Hey, yeah, I still have my ringer off. And I looked, I'm like, oh, wow. Yeah.
Oh, no, what happened was when I got I realized my Bluetooth wasn't pushed up. I thought it was paired up already. It wasn't. I was trying to pair it up. I hit it on the same touch screen. I actually then hung it up instead. And I had to dial you back.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but anyway, yeah. It was pretty cool. I mean, it was a timing issue because we got the same room. You can't see.
Right.
Can't read each other. So a couple times I didn't, know you were gonna come in or what, But I thought it went pretty cool.
Yeah. Yeah, it was good to have, definitely good to have. I actually forgot about Calvin because I usually text him, but I forgot about him because it actually worked out fine anyway.
Oh, yeah, I thought you did with
Right.
Marcus always have his insight. He's not a natural speaker, but his insight makes up for it.
Right.
He got a real good understanding of the game. He kind of had to be a student of the game. At his size, playing cornerback, he had to really learn technique. And so he had to really bear down. Eric Williams really kept Marcus, he tell me all the time, he didn't know how to play corner until Eric showed him how to play corner. Because Marcus' size, that's a pretty big size for a corner, that's athleticism in the jury, but that's athleticism and everything you got there on that island. You got a real good understanding of the game, starting out and everything. Yeah, I thought it was pretty good. That was that guy they called. That was Tony, the producer on my show at CBS.
Is that the guy whose house we went over?
That was Tony.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that was him. And when I was calling him, I was messaging him and a few other kids, but I didn't realize how close we were when I hung up to the start time. Because I was on about, I think like 3 or 4 minutes now, and I didn't realize it was that close,
Mm-hmm.
So I put, by the time I called him, Jermaine, I looked at the time, and by the time I actually got on the line, he had just started already, It sounds clean. I can hear him real clean.
Yeah.
Everything sounded pretty clean. There was a few little times that I heard some, but I think that was coming through his phone.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Yeah, I heard some background stuff, but I hadn't heard it like I was on, so I just think that was something on him because he had an house.
Okay.
So, yeah, so I figured that.
I figured that was him. I forgot to ask what his number was so I would know to recognize it. But when I saw the 210 area code.
Yeah, he was probably from the house. He moved up there. He made it there about a month or so ago.
Oh, really?
He ain't been up there that long. Yeah, him and the girlfriend, he moved up there because he had been back to Dallas, and his mom and dad got sick at the same time.
Wow.
So he had to move back home, be closer to them. And, he went through all those financial problems.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because when I download it, it becomes an MP3 file automatically. So, and then I can send it to you, and you can send it to him. And so, yeah, it doesn't take that long to do that. So I'm gonna do that. Yeah, and you actually, what happens is it automatically, the show, like once the show finishes, it does something so like somebody can go online and just click and listen to it. So that's what happens a lot. People share the show or they go back and listen to it later. Yeah. It does, but then if I want to put it in iTunes, they sent me the information of how I can do that. So it's in their system, but I could put it like if I wanted to have it on SoundCloud or wherever, something else.
Because when I tuned in, I was just listening, watch the intro on, it was very clean. We had almost like digital Christmas, which you can do the phone won't do.
Right.
Listen to the phone, because if it sounds like that through the phone, then people online